በተርቱ ንግግረ መልካም እንግዳን ሲጠሩ ያልወህስ ወንድም አቤት የእናት ልጅ መከታዬ ክንዴ ትከሻ ያንተ ነህ ወንድሜ አንተ ነህ ዘመዴ
Good morning, Your Excellencies, ambassadors, heads of UN agencies and other organizations here present, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'm pleased to welcome you to the ECA at 60th anniversary event. If you could kindly take your seats. Our program will begin shortly with a traditional performance by a group called Mankira Traditional Dancing Troupe from Ethiopia. So if I may just call the Mankira Traditional Dancing Troupe to entertain us before we commence our program. Thank you. We are expecting the Deputy Prime Minister of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia, who will be here any moment. And as soon as he comes in, our program will commence. But let me call on the traditional dancers to please come forward and continue the very nice performance they had started. Thank you.
Afkash yokamena mam sari kartishir garad yarakub khare bunqorch qashal khare boxtuti sari wani ulyash musta shitania oh we meru
abolaba abogija garada shadabande Shut
በተርቱ ንግግረ መልካም እንግዳን ሲጠሩ ያሉህስ ወንድም አቤት የእናቴ ልጅ መከታዬ ክንዴ ትከሻ ያንተ ነህ ወንድሜ አንተ ነህ ዘመዴ ናናናና 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 ናናናና
Yenjalbiya tom 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 Yenjalbiya wane 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 Yenjalbiya tom 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 Yenjalbiya Anisia esetia wale 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 sa 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 ambasa basariga ambasa basariga ambasa basawaya ambasa basawaya ambasa basariga ambasa basariga ambasa basawaya
Excellent. Another round of applause for this group. I'm told that the main message or theme of this dance is to signify a united and peaceful Ethiopia that harnesses the vibrancy and dynamism of its youth in development. There couldn't be a more befitting theme for that than this occasion, this very special occasion of ECA at 60. Thank you. Your Excellencies, ambassadors, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats as the program is about to start. I have the pleasure to introduce our guests and those sitting on the high table this morning for this very special celebration, ECA at 60. Celebrating ECA at 60 with the theme, An Innovation Challenge. Let me start by introducing our distinguished guests who have graciously honored this event this morning. And the United Nations Under-Secretary General and Executive Secretary of ECA, Her Excellency Vera Songwe. The chair of the ECA, the 51st session of the Economic Commission for Africa, His Excellency Ambassador El Sadiq Bahelt El Faki Abdallah, ably represented by His Excellency Ambassador El Sadiq Omar Abdallah, Deputy Head of Mission and Chargé d'Affaires. Deputy Chairperson of the African Union Commission, His Excellency Kwesi Kwartey. We have here with us this morning the Administrator of the United Nations Development Program and Vice Chair of the United Nations Sustainable Development Group, His Excellency Mr. Akim Steiner. And our distinguished guest of honor, the Deputy Prime Minister of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia, His Excellency Demeke Mekonnen. You're welcome, sir. Thank you very much. Let me start by saying that today is a very special day, not only for ECA, but for Africa. 60 years is indeed a milestone in the life of any organization. Not only because it provides an opportunity for reflection on the many achievements of the organization, and ECA has had very many achievements to its name. But it also provides an opportunity to look ahead, to look forward at the next 60 years, or the next 40 years when we will be celebrating our centenary. We are at a crossroads in ECA and in Africa, not least because of the launch of the SDGs 3 years ago, which has pretty much cut out our work for us. And of course, the African Union Agenda 2063. Without further ado, I would like to call on Her Excellency, Madam Vera Songwe, to deliver her opening remarks. Madam Songwe.
Good morning. His Excellency Mr. Demeke Mekonnen, Deputy Prime Minister of the Federal Republic of Ethiopia, His Excellency Ambassador Kwesi Kwartey, Deputy Chairperson of the African Union Commission, His Excellency Ambassador El Sadiq Omar Abdallah, Deputy Head of Mission and Chargé d'Affaires, Republic of Sudan, Mr. Akim Steiner, Administrator of the United Nations Development Program, members of the diplomatic community, colleagues from the United Nations family, distinguished guests, excellencies from the government of Ethiopia. I think we have the president of the Supreme Court of Ethiopia with us. Welcome. Thank you for coming back to see us again today. Distinguished guests. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I want to first start by thanking you for joining us today as we commemorate the 60th anniversary of the Economic Commission for Africa. 60 decades ago, member states gathered in New York to establish what is now the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, as part of an effort to support African governments raise economic activity and improve standards of living. At the time of the establishment, many African countries had recently gained independence or were struggling to gain independence. Much more were still struggling to gain independence. ECA provided a platform within which countries could debate critical issues and lay the foundation for institutional and human resource development. It was a time for political independence. It was a time for self-determination. It was a time for Africa to re-emerge and reassume its place in a political space. Since then, ECA has worked hand in hand with governments championing the African development agenda to ensure that that dream of 60 years ago actually comes to pass. Achievements of ECA alongside our member states have been notable, from being the first intergovernmental Pan-African institution to being the birthplace of the Organization of African Unity. For 60 years, ECA has contributed to shaping Africa's changing narrative, often being at the forefront of independent thinking on Africa's development policies. ECA's contributions have covered pertinent areas of economic integration, trade policy, infrastructure development, gender equality, a statistics agenda, the climate debate, the science and innovation revolution, the migration discussion, the digital economy as we move forward. ECA has contributed to consensus building and giving Africa one voice at the global level. And this was evident in the articulation of Africa's priorities in the post-2015 development agenda. It is no surprise, therefore, that the first UN Secretary General from Africa is the one who also birthed the Millennium Development Goals, intrinsic to Africa's development and Africa's rise. And as we stand here today and as we celebrate the 60th anniversary of ECA, we must remember His Excellency Kofi Annan for being, I think, one of the champions of the ECA and of Africa's development in the last decade. Excellencies, distinguished guests, many African countries have achieved remarkable progress over the last 6 decades. Indeed, we have seen African countries labeled as some of the fastest growing countries in the world. Africa today is is a continent with economic autonomy, is in the haste for accelerated development. I think that we no longer talk about an Africa on the rise, but an Africa that has risen. Politically, for sure, we have less coup d'etats, we have, of course, less civil strife, even though those that persist remain, I think, a cancer to the continent, and we must ensure that, as the African Union says, we can silence the guns. But we have gone from political independence, and as ECA, standing side by side with Africa, to economic independence, and there is no better signal of Africa's economic independence and Africa's strive for economic autonomy than the African Free Trade, Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. I think Africa coming together to form one market, Africa coming together to trade with 1.2 billion people in a $2.3 trillion economy, which we hope will double in the next decade, is a clear determination of Africa's economic independence, Africa's decision to become, like all the other continents, an important economic weight in the world. It is only through that Africa can ensure that the Sustainable Development Goals are met. As Secretary General Guterres says, for us to meet the SDGs, for the world to meet the SDGs, Africa must succeed. As ECA, we stand together with our member states to ensure that this happens. It is going to be a challenge. Despite all the progress, Africa is home to 70% of the world's poor, and current projections show that all countries of the region are off track in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals entirely. So we must continue the fight, and we must double our determination. The achievement for prosperity, it remains elusive for many, a prosperous Africa, which is the dream of the ECA and the dream of many of our member states, is within reach. We can see it, but we haven't gotten there yet. We hope that in the next decades, we ensure that we can help our member states working hand in hand to achieve the dream of a prosperous Africa. 2018 marks an important time to pause and reflect on where we are, where we have come, and where we are headed. Lessons from the past mean that we must do better. We must double our efforts. As ECA becomes one of the main think tanks on the continent, we have to move from just thinking, from ideas to action. We have to become a think tank that helps countries both implement. We know today that one of the biggest constraints on the continent is implementation. We have the ideas, we have the resources. We need to move to implementation. So we stand today to tell our member states, but also and more importantly, our partners of 60 years. We would not have come here if we didn't have the kinds of partnerships that we have with many of you across the globe, the IFIs, the development community, our member states, our development partners, civil society, and as we get into this next decade of ECA, the private sector as well, an important and core component of Africa's growth. We must bring all these partnerships together under the SDG goals. We know that that is one of the SDG goals, is to develop better, stronger, and more resilient partnerships to ensure that we could meet together the challenges of the next decade. It is timely that we celebrate ECA's 60th anniversary at a time when we are tasked with delivering on both Agenda 2030 and Agenda 2063, clearly determined, clearly defined, with indicators labeling where we need to go and how we need to go to them. As we celebrate this milestone, we must continue to listen and engage with our member states, including academic institutions, and we want to thank the University of Addis Ababa for being with us today, and other academic institutions, to ensure that the thought process for Africa, defining Africa's agenda over the next decade, is one that is inclusive. For only if we remember our past and define our future together will we achieve the ends that we all collectively aspire to. Over the last few days, a series of events have been organized to mark this special occasion. Equally, in the last few months, we have reached out to some of you to capture your views and to take stock of the past and the future. However, this commemoration today should not mark the end, but just the beginning of Africa entering a new dawn, Africa ensuring that we have learned the lessons of the past and with determination, strive, but also a lot of pride from the last 60 decades, we enter the next one, ensuring that the prosperous Africa is within reach, within our lifetime. We ensure that as the youth look forward to an Africa, it will be an Africa that aspires them to remain on the continent, to build a stronger continent, and to ensure that Africa clearly and truly regains its position in the community of nations. I also want to take this occasion to particularly thank the people and the government of Ethiopia for having hosted and being an incredible and gracious host to the Commission for the last 60 years. I want to thank them for all the hospitality, for the continuing hospitality and increasing openness that they have shown, not just to the ECA, but to the whole UN family. And I think that it is very fitting that we have the administrator of UNDP and the chair of the UN family with us today, because you have not only hosted ECA, you have hosted the whole UN family. So thank you very much for that. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I want you to join us as we celebrate ECA at 60. This was not meant to be a technical speech, but really just to thank you for your presence here today, for the excitement that you bring, that we feel at 60. Our teams have been working tirelessly for the last 4 months in particular to make this happen. I think that we feel pride, we feel community. We are marking the 60th anniversary under the theme of innovation, because we believe that that is really the hope and the promise of Africa as we go forward. It is going to be an innovative Africa full of young people with innovation stemming across the globe and across the continent. We already see young Africans winning innovation challenges in Silicon Valley, on the continent, in Nairobi, in Ethiopia, in Djibouti, in Dakar, in South Africa. So we really believe that the promise for this continent is innovation. And as ECA, we stand together with the youth to ensure that as they continue to do that, we can work alongside them. Once again, I want to thank everybody at the ECA, past and present, all the executive secretaries, and we will hear them in different videotapes, for having brought us to where we are today, and hopefully that we can keep the promise of taking ECA and Africa forward. Thanks again for your attention.
Thank you very much, Madam Executive Secretary, for that very inspiring welcome remarks. I would like to take this opportunity to request for a slight break in the program to allow the Executive Secretary pay tribute and honor those who contributed immensely in some of the preparatory activities leading up to this very auspicious occasion today. One of those activities was soccer matches that were played over this past weekend in the Addis Ababa Stadium. And this involved a number of organizations, ECA included, the African Union Commission, the Addis Ababa University, and a few others. So, Madam Executive Secretary, with your permission, I would like to read out the names of the winners in each category for you to present prizes and a trophy to them. Yes. We will start with the medals for the third place. And this was won by Addis Ababa University. Can we have the captain of the team come forward? In second place is ECA, Economic Commission for Africa. And the main trophy goes to the African Union Commission. Thank you. On that lighter note, I would like us to continue our program. And I was just overhearing the ES joking, saying that we helped establish the African Union in 1964, and here they beat us in the soccer match. Thank you. But let's continue with this program. Unfortunately, the ambassador of I've just been informed that the chief of mission of the embassy of Sudan, who's representing the ambassador, is here, and so I would like to call on him, His Excellency Omar Abdallah, to deliver his opening remarks.
Good morning. His Excellency Demeke Mukannan, the Deputy Prime Minister of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia, His Excellency the Deputy AU Commission, His Excellency the Executive Secretary of the ECA, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Let me, in the outset, to express my gratitude and thanks for inviting the ambassador and the permanent representative to the ECA of the Republic of the Sudan in his capacity as the chair of the 51st session of the Commission to attend this session, to attend and address this session, and to commemorate the 60th anniversary of the ECA. It is a great honor for us, and it is also a great day for the whole of Africa. Me, I'm Ambassador Sadiq Omar Abdallah, the Deputy Head of Mission. This is a great honor for me to address on behalf of the permanent representative of the Republic of Sudan. Let me just say a few words about this great occasion. Since its establishment, the ECA has functioned as a major think tank, generating of knowledge and applied policies, research, and key development priorities. It provides regional intergovernmental platforms to discuss issues of common concern. The ECA is successful in making the conference the Conference of African Minister of Finance, Economic Planning and Development meetings, and also meetings of intergovernmental committee of experts at sub-regional level, work for regional policy articulation by member states. We also appreciate the function of the ECA for providing policy advice through direct support to African countries upon request. We commend the ongoing collaboration between the ECA and the AU. The ECA is delivering ideas and actions for an empowered, inclusive, and transformed Africa, informed by the Agendas 2030 and Agendas 2063. The chair of the bureau is the chair of the bureau of the ECA would like to renew his commitment for full cooperation with with the Secretariat of the ECA in order to coordinate and prepare for the forthcoming 52nd session of the African Minister of Finance conference that will be held in March in 2019 in Morocco. So we are looking forward, and we are ready to coordinate and cooperate with the ECA as we are doing. And let me, in the end, to thank you all and to thank the ECA for inviting us. And thank you very much, and goodbye.
Thank you, Ambassador. His Excellencies, I would like to call on the Deputy Chairperson of the African Union Commission, His Excellency Kwesi Kwate.
Good morning, everybody. Your Excellency, Deputy Prime Minister of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia, Honorable Demeke Mekonnen, Your Excellency, Mr. Achim Steiner, Administrator of the United Nations Development Program and Vice Chair of the United Nations Sustainable Development Group, proud sister, Dr. Vera Songwe, proud daughter of Africa, and current Executive Secretary of the UN Economic Commission for Africa, my dear sister, Ambassador El Sahig Al-Faki Abdallah, Ambassador El Sahig Ombe Abdallah, Deputy Head of Mission and Chargé d'Affaires of the Republic of Sudan here, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, I bring you the fraternal greetings of His Excellency Dr. Musa Faki Mahamat, Chair of the African Union Commission, who for reasons beyond his control is unable to make it here, in spite of his best endeavors and wishes. Nonetheless, I am truly delighted to be able to be here in his stead and share this moment of celebration with you. The United Nations Economic Commission for Africa could be said, figuratively, to have given birth to our predecessor organization, the OAU. Over the past 60 years, UNECA has partnered Africa, the OAU, and now the African Union Commission in all our numerous and multifaceted endeavors and exertions. And in the words of the Deputy Executive Secretary Giovanni Bila, we are truly joined at the hip as Siamese twins. UNECA has partnered us in the vicissitudes of national liberation, continental liberation, and currently is in lockstep with the African Union Commission in the exciting and enriching process of continental integration, within which context only the socio-economic transformation of Africa could realistically take place. Today, as we celebrate 60 years together, it is probably not entirely out of place to reflect on our journey together, how it all began, that is to say, to undertake a walk through memory lane and remind ourselves that we owe our origins and our existence to the lofty cadences of the UN Charter, which highlights inter alia in the preamble, quote, to promote social progress and better standards of life in larger freedom. And in that regard, to employ international machinery for the promotion of economic and social advancement of all our peoples. Now, under Article 68 of the UN Charter, ECOSOC was specifically mandated to set up the commissions in economic and social fields. In 1946, it decided to establish the Economic Commission for Europe, mainly to provide effective aid to European countries destroyed by the Second World War. In 1947, the Economic Commission for Asia and the Far East, later designated the Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, ESCAP, was also established. At the time, the general view was that the vast Asian population was entitled to United Nations assistance in confronting the huge problems of post-war development. In August 1947, one of the arguments for setting up the Economic Commission for Latin America, ECLAC, was the region's low standard of living, which prevents its inhabitants from fully contributing to global progress and welfare. The establishment of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa took a much longer and more difficult struggle. This was led by a handful of independent African countries, at the time supported by their allies, also independent countries, and the motion was directly introduced to the second committee at the 12th United Nations General Assembly in 1957, incidentally the year of Ghana's independence, the first in sub-Saharan Africa. The UN General Assembly that year passed a resolution directing ECOSOC to establish an African Regional Economic Commission by ECOSOC Resolution 6725 of 29th April. UNECA was established on the 19th of April 1958 with a geographical scope covering the entire African continent. In a way, therefore, UNECA could be said to have paved the way for the establishment of the Organization of African Unity, OAU, in May 1963. ECOSOC demanded that a problem of social development be made a part of the terms of reference of UNECA and included in its mandate a provision for dealing with the social and economic development and the interrelationship between economic and social factors. In addition to the mandate and social factors, in addition to the mandate to promote economic and social development of its member states, the Economic Commission for Africa was also to foster intra-regional and to promote international cooperation for Africa's development. Your Excellencies, in 1958, when ECOSOC had a full membership of 15 states, only 8 of these states were from Africa, and these were Ethiopia, Ghana, Libya, Morocco, Sudan, Tunisia, and the United Arab Republic, Egypt. 6 non-African states were then enjoying full membership, and these were the usual suspects: Belgium, France, Italy, Spain, and the United Kingdom. You could call them, I say again, the usual suspects. Associate members admitted to ECOSOC on the 29th April 1958 were Nigeria, Gambia, Kenya, Zanzibar, Sierra Leone, British Somaliland Protectorate, Tanganyika, and Uganda. African member states of UNECA fought against the prevailing situation in which certain non-self-governed territories were not represented in the Commission as associate members, whereas certain non-African countries with territorial interests within Africa were accorded full membership. We have indeed come a long way. The African member states demanded that the full membership status of the colonial powers be altered, curtailed, or even terminated, and that there should be an African participation on behalf of non-self-governing states. Eventually, France, Spain, and the UK agreed to a reduction in their status to associate membership and to allow, in accordance with the will of the Commission, for the non-self-governing territories under the administration to be granted direct representation as associate members. This was ratified by ECOSOC in an amendment to the terms of reference in 1963. Your Excellencies, what is distinctive and of significant similarity about the Economic Commission for Africa was the implications on the functionings of its intra-government structure in its strategic and close partnership with the African Union particularly the African Union Commission, which has become and continues to become a more vibrant, politically influential Pan-Africanist organization with overlapping and co-terminus membership with the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. It is therefore also remarkable and interesting, and indeed noteworthy, that the reform of the United Nations development system is taking place at the same time as the reform of the African Union and its Commission. In 2016, the United Nations General Assembly provided guidance for the repositioning of the United Nations to enhance its cohesion and maximize its capabilities and capacities to achieve the United Nations social development goals. The three guiding principles which undergirded this ambitious agenda were: one, reinforcing national ownership; two, developing country contextual responses; and three, ensuring effective delivery of development outcomes on the ground. To help member countries implement the 2030 agenda, the Secretary General Guterres sought to reposition the United Nations development system through changing organizational arrangements, skill sets, leadership, as well as the coordination and accountability mechanism in the United Nations development system. The United Nations General Assembly, that is to say the World's Parliament, welcomed the Secretary General's vision on 31st May 2018. The key reforms centered around the following: a new generation of UN country-centered programs around a strategic plan developed in close consultation with governments and led by an impartial, independent, and empowered United Nations coordinator. This was intended to allow member states to guide the system-wide action and to bring greater transparency and accountability within a robust evaluation system. Two, reprofiling and repositioning the work of the regional economic communities to broaden the link between the regional economic communities and the broader UN family at both regional and country levels. Three, a funding compact designed to bring better quality, quantity, and predictability of resources in exchange for accelerated repositioning and enhanced capacity of the system to deliver on the 2030 agenda with increased transparency and accountability. On partnership, steps will be taken for a stronger UN institutional response and system-wide approach to partnership for the 2030 agenda by strengthening the capacity of the UN country teams and engagement with headquarters, civil society, the private sector, international financial institutions, and others. The UN Secretary General could be said to be seeking to make the United Nations Development System an active partner in implementation of the Agenda 2063, for which we very much appreciate. The support of the United Nations regional bodies brings with it three major international interconnected functions. One, convening power in support of intergovernmental platforms, think tanks, serving as a source of knowledge, data, statistics, and evidence-based analysis for member states on priority policy issues. Two, operational functions, providing policy advice and targeted capacity development to assist member states on regional, global, and transboundary sub-regional issues. The United Nations and regional economic communities were to serve as policy integrator of the 2030-2063 agenda, to integrate the two agendas. Together, as policy integrator, they could focus on knowledge, policy, and research, and garner and provide global intergovernmental support, coordination, and alignment with the REX, the AU, and the UN development groups. Your Excellencies, under the rubric of Resolution 1998-46, the 5 regional mechanisms mandated by ECOSOC could provide a high-level policy platform for exchanging views on major strategic developments and challenges faced by regions and sub-regions and the alignment of regional and global agendas. This would help and should help promote policy coherence within the UN system in response to identified regional priorities. To us, what is critically and crucially significant in all of this is the role of organization and planning. Organization, as Kwame Nkrumah said some 50 years plus ago, decides everything. And organization presupposes planning, and planning demands a program to provide contextual basis. Planning also demands a common understanding and a common integrated perspective on issues. To conclude, Your Excellencies, all this brings me back to the question of Pan-Africanism, the CFTA that we see now, the free movement, and the single airspace, all important aspects of the revival and development of Africa and of the African personality. Pan-Africanism finds expression in a reawakening of consciousness among Africans and of peoples of African descent, and of the bonds that unite us, our historical past, our culture, our common experience, and our common aspirations. So with these few remarks, Your Excellencies, Mr. Prime Minister, I have the distinct honor and privilege to wish the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa a happy 60th birthday. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Kwate, for reminding us of that history of Africa, which is very closely intertwined with ECA's own history. We're running out of time, so without further ado, I would like to call on the administrator of the UNDP, Mr. Akim Steiner, to deliver his speech. Mr. Steiner.
His Excellency Demeke Mekonnen, Deputy Prime Minister of the Federal Republic of Ethiopia, Deputy Chairperson of the African Union Commission, His Excellency Kwesi Kwate, my dear colleague Vera Songwe, Executive Secretary of the Economic Commission for Africa, and Deputy Head of Mission Omar Abdullah of the Republic of Sudan. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues in the UN family, the African Union Commission, and our other sister agencies that are present here today. I want to thank, first of all, the Executive Secretary for allowing me to join you on this very special occasion. 60 years, the 60th anniversary of the Economic Commission for Africa is really quite a remarkable number, not only of years to celebrate, but also of periods that have defined the development narrative of the continent of Africa. And as the Executive Secretary said, ECA, the Economic Commission for Africa, has in many ways been part of Africa's continuously changing narrative of development for 6 decades. I was trying to quickly look up a statistic on what average life expectancy would have been in 1958 and what it is today, but I couldn't make the internet work. So I'll 42 and 67. Well, that's roughly what I expected. And it is just one way of thinking, how life was different 60 years ago, just on something as basic as life expectancy, education, infrastructure, access to energy. You name all the major parameters of development. Much of Africa in 1958 was looking at the future of development. And yet, as we have heard today, it is no longer a discussion about the future of development. It is in the midst of major development transformation. And it is against this backdrop that I listened very carefully to the speeches that were made just now. I consider myself to be, in many ways, a product of African development journeys, because much of my working life I have spent on this continent, working with colleagues both in different contexts of economic development, of sustainable development, and then having 10 wonderful years working out of Nairobi when I headed the United Nations Environment Programme. Today I join Vera here very much in an act of both friendship and solidarity to celebrate an institution that has stood, as we also just heard from Ambassador Kwati, for so many aspirations not only coming from within Africa, but also from the international community. At the end of the day, the United Nations is an expression of collective interest, of collective commitments, and the fact that in 1958, the United Nations family established an Economic Commission for Africa when most of its nation states, as we know the continent today, were still struggling for independence, trying to escape from the legacy of colonialism and embarking on these aspirational pathways for development. To be able to stand here today and say 60 years is not basically a point in life where you step back from things, because around 60 or so, many in the world tend to think more about retirement. And I think it is a wonderful occasion to our executive secretary here to be able to look forward with the Economic Commission at a moment in time when Africa truly is going through a major period of transformation. Transformation in so many ways, and I do not have to tell you what they are, but in the political sphere, in the economic sphere, in social change, in the environment, the advent of climate change, but also the digital economy, the possibilities that are both associated with it and the challenges of trying to bring a continent that has to compete in a global economic marketplace where artificial intelligence will soon be the most extraordinary leveler of possibility, but may also be the greatest differentiator in creating new inequalities. These are challenges that will transform African economies. It will also transform the relationship of the world with the African continent. So few in the rest of the world understand today that just in the next 30 to 40 years, more people will be connected to an electricity grid on this continent than the entire Chinese nation has put onto a power grid in the last 50 years. We are talking about phenomenal changes that will not only drive development within the continent, but will change the relationship of the African continent to the rest of the world and vice versa. Imagine for a moment fossil fuel powered energy systems in 2050. 1.5 billion more people depending on fossil fuels will not only put into question the entire notion of a Paris Agreement, it will also, frankly, change the dynamics of the entire global marketplace for energy. Extraordinary choices and opportunities are emerging today that we together, ECA, the UN family, UNDP, have over the last decades tried to bring both to the table in terms of options that Africa would consider for its own development, but also in working with the institutions across the continent, and particularly with the African Union as it has emerged, the African Union Commission, a partnership that is becoming ever stronger, in which ECA is the UN's anchor here in Addis Ababa. Let me also take this opportunity to echo and acknowledge the extraordinary vision and wisdom and commitment of Ethiopia to the institutions of Africa, but also to the UN's presence here on the continent. 1958, what extraordinary foresight to have had at that point in time to envisage a kind of capital of Africa as we see it here today. I want to end by just echoing a little bit also to the notion of reform. The African Union is going through major reforms. The United Nations is passing through major reforms. Reforms are always an expression of both frustration and aspiration. We are, in a sense, seeing the world at large, our citizens questioning many of our institutions. They are not evolving fast enough. They are not being responsive enough, not accessible enough, but also in our structural configuration, we often become calcified. We become slow. We develop inertia. We lose horizon. We lose ambition. I think listening to you just now, Deputy Chairperson, I was very struck by the fact that the coincidence of the reform of the African Union and the United Nations led by Secretary General Antonio Guterres is perhaps no accident. It is both an expression of lessons learned within each of these institutions, but also a sign of our times. Things will change dramatically over the next decade or two. Development simply will not be a progression in exponential terms that follows a trajectory that is reflecting the past. Major disruptions in a sense of an opportunity, but also in the sense of this disturbance. and uncertainty, and certainly also in terms of potential crisis, are all part of this outlook. As we work together with the Economic Commission for Africa in the UN family, but also in UNDP, we are highly committed to this notion that has evolved over many years, that namely the UN family, the African Union Commission, but also institutions such as the African Development Bank and others on the continent are bound to work together. We are bound to also continue to do the kinds of things that we have learned to do together. Just recently, the African Economic Conference in Kigali, the forthcoming African Sustainable Development Report of the African Union Commission, the African Development Bank, the Economic Commission for Africa, and UNDP are just a couple of examples of how we bring together the continent's lessons and tackle many of the main issues that lie ahead in terms of decision-making and strategic choices. I want to end by picking up on one theme that I know the Executive Secretary has also put at the center of her tenure here at the Economic Commission for Africa, and that is innovation, often cited and more often demonstrated not necessarily in our institutions as being easy to realize. I hope that over the next years, we will together be able to work across the continent on this notion of innovation in development, innovation for development, and development driving innovation from within the continent. We have many examples of where this is happening already today, and I think in the way that we can work together, both with the Economic Commission, the African Union, the African Union Commission, and individual countries, provides enormous opportunities. You can count on us in the United Nations Development Programme to continue to maintain the strongest presence across the continent of any international organization, and not just temporarily, but to have been part of the journey of development of this continent for over 4 decades. Today still present in 50 countries, and on the innovation front, opening new partnerships with an accelerator lab initiative that we will launch in 60 countries worldwide next year. But our commitment to Africa is to have half of them established here on the continent. They will be some of the platforms that we can use to work together with our institutions, but also with the countries of the continent. Thank you again for inviting me to join you for this celebration, and have a wonderful birthday. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Steiner, for that speech, and especially highlighting the kinds of policy innovations that would be crucial to achieving the promise of these Sustainable Development Goals and the AU Agenda 2063. And indeed, Africa has come a long way and has achieved tremendous growth and development over the last 60 years. And ECA has continued to accompany Africa in this journey. Thank you very much for that speech. I would now like to call on the Deputy Prime Minister of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia, Mr. Demeke Mekonnen, to deliver his keynote. Prime Minister.
Good morning. ክቡራን እንግዶቻችን እንኳን ለዚህ ታላቅ ፕሮግራም ለመታደም አበቃችሁ ለማለት እወዳለሁ። Your Excellency Ms. Vera Songwe, Executive Secretary of the Economic Commission of Africa, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the people and the government of Ethiopia and of myself, may I welcome you all most warmly to Addis Ababa and to this most auspicious occasion, the commemoration of the 16th anniversary of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. Ethiopia has been privileged to host the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa for these 6 decades. And we are delighted to celebrate this anniversary with all our friends and development partners from across the globe. It is indeed an anniversary that underlines the effective solidarity and real cooperation of the ACA with Africa. 60 years ago, in 1958, when the ACA was established by the United Nations Economic and Social Council, it was given a mandate to promote the economic and social development of Africa countries through international cooperation. This still remains its mandate today, and it is still entirely relevant. The ACA's contribution to Africa's development continues to be shaped by continental priorities and by the need for partnership and collaboration. 60 years ago, His Imperial Majesty, Emperor Haile Selassie, made the same point, underlining the necessity of cooperation for the development of Africa. And he said, the economies of Africa's states have too long existed as separate, self-contained, isolated entities. We are all only too well acquainted with the difficulties and barriers that the African people have had to overcome in coming together. The African people have had to overcome in coming together to deliberate on matters of common interest. It is impossible to believe that individual countries working alone and isolated from their neighbors can never achieve their objectives. The African peoples must therefore work and cooperate together if the economic development of this continent is to be furthered. This remains equally true today. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, this is a special occasion. I offer my warmest congratulations to the ACA for its achievement over the past 6 decades. It has had a difficult and dual role as a regional arm of the UN and as a part of the regional institutional landscape in Africa. In carrying out this dual role and, if I may say so, with great competence and even assurance, it has made a whole series of significant contributions in building enhanced partnerships and integrating Africa into the global economy. One aspect of this I must emphasize here has been its role in moving forward the African Continental Free Trade Agreement process. Its support for this and its pivotal role, encouraging Africa's transformation agenda, as well as its continuing contributions for the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals and Agenda 2063 cannot be exaggerated. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, nor can I emphasize too strongly that the ACA has been and is a most important and effective institution in developing our knowledge across a range of issues relevant to Africa's development. Inclusive and green growth, innovative financing for sustainable development, natural resource management and governance, illicit financial flows, regional integration, trade, urbanization, industrialization, and infrastructure. These are all areas where the ECA has translated knowledge into country-level support and sound policy. The Economic Commission for Africa has done an immense job over the last 6 decades. We are very grateful, and it also remains exceptionally well placed to continue its unique contribution to Africa's development challenges and its support for Agenda 2063 and the Global Agenda 2030. With this example before us, this is therefore an occasion that offers us the opportunity to rededicate our own effort to the socio-economic emancipation and development of Africa. And it gives us a further opportunity to expand and renew our own partnerships with the rest of the world as we continue to move toward this Agenda 2063 and the Africa we want. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, finally, as the ECA is an integral part of Ethiopian community, we are particularly pleased to celebrate its 16th anniversary at an exciting time of change and reform in our country. The dynamics of reform in Ethiopia has already unlocked the door to hope and prosperity in our sub-region. The spectacular peace between Ethiopia and Eritrea has started showing peace dividends to the people of the Horn of Africa. Thank you. The spectacular peace between Ethiopia and Eritrea has started showing peace dividends to the people of the Horn of Africa, creating unprecedented opportunities for the collective peace and prosperity. We are confident that our partners will continue to be alongside us in our regional integration agenda. We are grateful for the all-rounded support from the United Nations family and all our partners in this endeavor. Ethiopia is determined to forge ahead with deepening the reform process across the whole socio-economic spectrum. The 16th birthday of ECA, which is a family member that crossed 3 generations, is a unique occasion for every Ethiopian. Congratulations once again. I thank you.
Thank you, sir, Deputy Prime Minister, for that very inspiring speech. And I would like, on behalf of the Executive Secretary, to express our gratitude to you for finding time to come to this meeting, and to assure you of the commitment of ECA, working together with the rest of the United Nations family to continue to support the reforms that have taken root in this country. And thank you again for the hospitality of the host country and the continued support for our work. Let me now, I think this is an occasion that is appropriate for launching what we call the Africa Poverty Clock, which is a tool that was designed to measure progress in real time on the first SDGs, the first out of the 17 SDGs, which is on ending poverty in all its manifestations. And here I would like to call upon Her Excellency Vera Songwe, Executive Secretary of ECA, to say a few words about the Africa Poverty Clock. Prime Minister, Deputy Prime Minister, you will also be joining in launching this very important initiative. Thank you.
Does he come with me? Okay. Sure. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, Africa poverty, I think when we talk about the SDGs, when we talk about a prosperous Africa, we're thinking about an Africa where we are able to eradicate poverty. However, the numbers on poverty today are quite staggering. We know that there are about 600 million people globally in 2019 that will be living in extreme poverty. Africa is contributing much more and much faster to the numbers on poverty across the continent today. When we come to work every day as the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, we worry about these numbers. So we thought that in the spirit of thinking and acting it will be better if we can also see what we are acting on. So we have worked very closely with our partners in the intellectual community, the Data Poverty Lab, and this is big data. Akim, you talked about what big data can do, to see what is it that we're doing and how is Africa doing in the areas of poverty. His Excellency, the Deputy Prime Minister, talked about this amazing change in Ethiopia and how fast it's happening. We know that when you have that kind of amazing peace and change, we can reduce our numbers on poverty much faster. So what ECA is doing is launching a poverty clock, which will be running all the time at the ECA, and it would essentially be there to show us what we are doing, what the rest of the continent is doing as a way of reducing poverty. With these few words, I pass on to the Deputy Prime Minister, and then we will show you the interactive tool as part of the launch. It's open to anybody, particularly the universities, to come and take a look at it and work with us on seeing how we can do some analysis on poverty, but also all of us, our UN families, the development community in Ethiopia and across Africa, in seeing how and what is it that each of us can do. And as you can see, it has some gender data, some urban data, and it brings together all of the different dimensions of development in this clock. Your Excellency, the Deputy Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Madam. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Today is really a special day for us on this anniversary. The main agenda for the upcoming time is on how to alleviate poverty and how to put a priority agenda for Africa and for Ethiopia. Today, we are managing emerging economy with all-round reform. So such kind of initiatives from ECA and from our development partners and brothers is really a good opportunity for us, and the government is very much committed in line with this action. Our top priority is peace, development, and democracy. Within development framework, alleviating poverty today is really a crucial agenda for the continent, especially for emerging countries like Ethiopia and the like. So my government is really very much committed and in line with these new initiatives and the like. Thank you very much. Just to say, and I would like to thank and appreciate for this agenda and for this call to the whole continent. Just a couple of words in Amharic for our audience. እንግዶቻችን በጋራ መዲናችን በሆነችው አዲስ አበባ ይሄ ትልቅ ተቋም 60 ዓመት ተጉዟል። በዚህ 60 ዓመት ጉዞ ብዙ ስራዎች ተሰርተዋል። ነገር ግን ደግሞ በፊታችን ላይ እጅግ በጣም ፈታኝ የሆነ የጸረ ድህነት ዘመቻ፣ የሰላምና የዲሞክራሲ ግንባታ አሁንም ወሳኝ አጀንዳ ሆኗል። ከ60 ዓመት በኋላም ድህነቱ ሰፊ ነው። ታላላቆቹ መሪዎቻችን እንዲህ አይነት ተቋም በትልቅ ቪዥን ወጥነው ወደ ተግባር አሰማርተዋል። ከዚህ የ60 ዓመት ጉዞ በኋላ ደግሞ እንደ ታላላቆቻችን ታላላቅ ስራ ለመስራት ያውኑ መሪዎች ያውኑ ሲቪል ሶሳይቲ ሊደርስ ኤንድ ሌሎችም ታላቅ ሆኖ ለመገኘት የታላላቆቹን ስራ መድገምና ድህነትን ለአንድ ጊዜ መዝጋት ይገባናል። ይሄ በእኛ ትከሻ ላይ ያለ አጀንዳ ነው። አመሰግናለሁ።
Um, Excellencies, ambassadors, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, there'll be short break of 3 minutes to allow our distinguished guest, the Deputy Prime Minister, leave. Thank you. The program continues after 3 minutes. You were not in the room? She coming? Is Irene coming? Okay. Okay.
በስሙ ነው ያለው የውስጡ
Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, kindly take your seats so that we continue to the second segment of this program. Thank you. Yes, yes. So somebody should be outside somebody should be outside to tell those outside. Room and take your seats as the program is about to restart. Thank you. going to tell them to get seat, just sit while the Prime Minister leaves. But for the ESA, I should tell them to take a break. You know? Yes. We'll just continue like that. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, the program is about to restart. May I kindly ask you to take your seats so that we continue. And those who are standing outside in the corridors should please come inside the room so that we can start. Thank you.